We've got the Baltimore Ravens heading to New Orleans to take on the Saints as 2-point favorites with the total set at 47 points. This is Showdown coverage brought to you by SharpFootballAnalysis.com. I'm your host, Adam Wilde, and we will jump right into the DraftKings slate. First thing we have is Lamar Jackson at the top as the most expensive player on the slate. He is $12,400. That's about the territory we expected to see him at. I think he's topped off at $12,800 in the past, so around his high end. And I'm assuming that the pricing has a lot to do with the lack of receiving options and just knowing that the only way that Baltimore is going to produce is going to be with Lamar Jackson's rushing upside, especially since they're down their top two running backs. So we've got another situation this year where Baltimore is just down an insane amount of production and because of injury. So, I mean, it's essentially malpractice by the Baltimore front office, but trade deadline came and passed and nobody was added to help Lamar Jackson. The only person that they added recently was Deshaun Jackson, and we still have not seen him suit up for the Ravens offense. So Lamar Jackson's going to be asked to do everything. Now, here's the trick with Lamar Jackson, though. People are going to be so comfortable playing him. His ownership is going to be about 80%, but not everybody's going to be interested in stacking him. People are going to be very likely to play Isaiah Likely with Lamar Jackson, but they're probably not going to play Jackson, Likely, and Duvernay. And Jackson has only completed more than 20 passes one time this season, or sorry, twice. Once 21, the other one 27 last week. But since the target tree is so condensed, we're not really worried about that because it's going to be a lot of Devin Duvernay and a lot of Isaiah Likely. So it's not going to be bad this late to play Lamar Jackson at captain with like Duvernay and Likely, which we'll get into more later, because the field is going to be so heavily invested in Saints 4x2 lineups because of all the value on the Saints side of the ball. So we might want to try to get some 3-3s in there. We still want some of the Saints value, but we wouldn't mind getting some of the Baltimore pass catchers in there, like at least two, because Isaiah Likely at 5,000 is going to be really highly owned. He'll be in a lot of lineups with Lamar Jackson, but we might be able to squeeze another one out in Devin Duvernay or maybe Tylan Wallace. Next is going to be Alvin Kamara at 11,400, very high for him as well. I think the difference between Kamara and Dalton is high enough that we still really like Kamara in this, especially since Andy Dalton's going to be popular. People are going to be putting 2 to 3 New Orleans receivers in their lineups, and that is going to lead people onto Andy Dalton because they're going to say, well, if I have 2 or 3 pass catchers from Andy Dalton, then I probably want to play Andy Dalton and save the 1,200. So Alvin Kamara is going to be around 50%, but he probably should be around a 70% player. The tricky thing between the Kamara and Andy Dalton debate is that Mark Ingram's going to be out, and the offense tends to change a good bit for Mark Ingram being out, even though he's just a backup running back. He just is an important part of their offense, and instead of going with a heavy dosage of Dwayne Washington, they're probably going to employ a lot of Taysom Hill. That could vulture touchdowns away from Alvin Kamara, could vulture touchdowns away from Andy Dalton. You don't really know, but he's been used a lot as like a wildcat running back. So that can be frustrating for Alvin Kamara in this game, and it makes Taysom Hill viable, even though he's a very high price tag and not actually a tight end. So we talked about Andy Dalton just a little bit. All his pass catchers are going to be super highly owned because they're going to be they're all way too cheap because there's no Michael Thomas, there's no Jarvis Landry. So, well, not all. All's a strong term. We'll get to a weird one in a second, but Chris Olave at 8,600. If we're not talking ownership, Chris Olave is my favorite play of the slate. He's going to be super highly owned because 8,600 is too low for him. He's getting 10, 11 targets a game. And albeit that's from Andy Dalton, but it hasn't seemed to matter of late. So Chris Olave is a bona fide wide receiver 1, like probably should be $10,000, and he's only 8,600 on this slate against a beatable Ravens secondary. 2-point underdogs at home, but I think that the Ravens could even win by more than that. I guess knock on wood if you're a Ravens fan. So Chris Olave is a favorite of mine, but you're not sneaking him past anybody. It's pretty obvious. He's way too cheap. It brings us to Kenyon Drake with Gus Edwards. Doubtful. I'm just in our write-up, I'm just counting him out. And then you've got J.K. Dobbins still out. It's actually been Kenyon Drake who's been leading the offense, even though Justice Hill is the more tenured running back for them. Kenyon Drake is the free agent addition. And last week he had 7 rushes and 4 targets and scored a touchdown. So we expect something similar to that, and he's not going to be super highly owned. He falls in a weird price range where he's 7,200, but Duvernay 6,800, Taysom Hill 6,400. Chris Olave is not that much more expensive at 1,400 more. So you're probably wanting to get up to Chris Olave. So Kenyon Drake falls into a weird range, and the 4 targets is probably enough to where I'm okay pairing him with Lamar Jackson. Even if you we're trying to pair Lamar Jackson with multiple pass catchers on this slate just to get unique. But if you're not comfortable getting unique in that way, you can just pair Jackson with Kenyon Drake and try to get that whole offense encompassed in those 2 players. That brings us to the wide receiver 1 in Devin Duvernay. Hey, hats off to Devin Duvernay for operating in the way that he has this year. But again, it's just malpractice by the Ravens front office. Devin Duvernay would be a nice piece like Isaiah McKenzie or Mecole Hardman or something like that. A guy we really like to have, a guy that is really meaningful for the offense, but by no means a target hog or anything like that. And Devin Duvernay has been asked to do way, way more than what he's being paid to do. So he is the wide receiver 1 for the Baltimore Ravens with Rashad Bateman out and top receiver overall because Mark Andrews is likely out. So we've got Devin Duvernay and Isaiah Likely as the 2 viable targets for Lamar Jackson. We'll get into some less viable targets a little bit later, but that's who we're looking at. And Devin Duvernay is an excellent play because people are just going to bypass the Ravens passing offense. Everyone's going to think that they have it figured out. At first glance, it's just play Jackson, maybe play Drake, and probably play Isaiah Likely, and then just cram in as many New Orleans pass catchers as you can. And I just don't know that it's that easy. So I'm going to include Devin Duvernay, give him a little boost, and try to get probably over 25% exposure to him because he'll probably be in the 20 to 30% range. Taysom Hill at 6,400. I mean, he's never going to feel comfy playing him. We're not going to be super happy about it, but he's got 2-3 touchdown upside, and his role will increase with Mark Ingram sideline. So Dwayne Washington is the replacement for Mark Ingram, but Mark Ingram's role is just, it's more of a, there's no 1-for-1 replacement for how they utilize Mark Ingram or what he means to the offense. They more so just change the offense when Mark Ingram's out. So we'll get a little Dwayne Washington, of course, and he's only, I think, 200 or 600. We'll get to that in a minute. But Taysom Hill's role is going to be expanded with Mark Ingram out for certain. So we'll probably see 6, 7, maybe 8 Wildcat plays. Taysom Hill's not going to be the quarterback, quote unquote, for all of them, but he gets in even when Alvin Kamara is the Wildcat quarterback at times. So expect to see a lot of Taysom Hill. It's going to be super frustrating if you fade him and he goes for 3 touchdowns, but not a must play by any means. Isaiah Likely at 5,800 is going to be like one of the highest owned players of the slate. People are going to be so excited to play him because of the potential that he's shown. And now he's going to be the top target, probably second top target for Lamar Jackson. So people are going to be all over Isaiah Likely. I don't know at 5,800 and his ownership if he's just a lock button. That's not super cheap. I mean, if we got Likely at 3,800, like he probably would have been if Mark Andrews was healthy, then sure. I mean, lock him in. Who cares the ownership? I don't know that you need to include him in 20 max. He's probably going to be a max 50% guy for me. And I know he's going to be in 90% of the optimal lineup. So I'm going to have to actually omit him from 40% of my builds, but that's fine. I'm just not going to eat the chalk entirely on Isaiah Likely. Love the player, love the play. Just probably going to be too highly owned to be worth just eating. So we have Shaheed at 5,000. I don't know how or why that happened. So he's got a few long touchdown catches, but in both games, I think he only had 1 target, and both of them were the long touchdown catches. So 5,000 is just it's too much for him. It's too much for his volume. This is showdown, so in large field, I mean, every play is viable, right? If they're touching the field, they're viable. But 5,000 is, I mean, if he catches another long bomb and he's 5% owned, you're going to wish you had him. So I wouldn't omit him, especially from 150 max. But he's not somebody I'm looking to play even as a pivot. Marquez Callaway is going to be the second leading target getter for the New Orleans Saints. He's 4,600. I don't really see the point really going Callaway. I'd rather go Juwan Johnson at 4,400 actually, with probably a little less ownership. But Callaway's fine at 4,600. It's just that outside of Chris Olave, there hasn't been much consistency between Callaway, Juwan Johnson, and Tre'Quan Smith. Tre'Quan Smith has caught at least a touchdown, maybe two. So Callaway, Johnson, and Tre'Quan Smith are all fine, and you compare two of them with Andy Dalton and no Alvin Kamara for a pretty decent value. Maybe a little bit of a pivot because Alvin Kamara will be highly owned, so you get a little bit of leverage there, but you're not going to be super unique with the Saints side of the ball. You're going to have to get unique on the Ravens side of the ball, whether it means stacking Lamar Jackson with multiple pass catchers or what have you. New Orleans, they're all going to be pretty highly owned because they're all too cheap. So I'm going to say I'm going to go Johnson over Callaway, but Callaway, Johnson, and Tre'Quan Smith are all fine, all good plays, all good values. James Proche is going to be the wide receiver 2 for the Baltimore Ravens. He's 3,800. I mean, you're going there because he's the second wide receiver for the Ravens, second wide receiver for Lamar Jackson, but it's going to be likely in Duvernay, and Proche might get 4 or 5 targets maybe. So 3,800, 5 targets, good value. But if you're getting like Will Lutz in the same ownership range as Proche, I would rather just have Lutz over Proche. So Proche's fine. Third, like I said, third option for Lamar Jackson, but I just don't think that I need to go there at 3,800. I think I can go cheaper. Tre'Quan Smith at 3,400 is a better option than James Proche. Maybe similar ownership, probably a little bit more on Tre'Quan Smith. But another option I like for the Ravens to get a little unique is Justice Hill. He's going to be serving as the running back 2, and he's going to get 4 or 5 carries for Baltimore. So, and he hasn't gotten more than 2 targets since I believe week 6, but we do know him as a pass catching option. Like, he can be a third down back. So if they utilize him that way, especially if they get down to New Orleans, it's only a 2-point spread. I like Justin Hill there, and people aren't going to want to play him because he's not a true punt at 2,200. That's like right outside of the punt range. So I don't mind going to Justice Hill as a really nice leverage play in multiple instances. Last play we don't want to talk about. I guess 2 more. So Josh Oliver, favorite punt play for the Ravens. They're so decimated. I've talked about it. I'm having a hard time even expressing how to go about playing the Baltimore pass catchers when we know that Lamar Jackson's only going to complete about 20 passes, and we know that they're all not top tier talents. Josh Oliver plays week in and week out, large portion of snaps. Baltimore Ravens use one of the heaviest 3 tight end usages in the league, and now we have nobody in front of him, right? Isaiah Likely is essentially going to be the wide receiver 2, maybe even the wide receiver 1. So Josh Oliver might even be operating as more of the traditional tight end 1 in the offense in this situation. He's already playing like 50% of the snaps. He's probably going to play 60, 65% of the snaps this week. Only $1,200. We're talking about 4 or 5 targets. So you could pay for James Proche, 3,800. Maybe you get 4 or 5 targets, but you can pay down on Josh Oliver, get the same 4 or 5 targets, and you're only paying $1,200. So Josh Oliver is one of those ways that I've been discussing to get unique on the Baltimore side of the ball. And then Nick Vanette's another fine option for the New Orleans Saints. They're not quite as depleted. They've got a lot of like low tier, medium tier wide receivers, but Vanette just plays very often. So he's on the field a ton for a $400 player, and he gets a reasonable amount of targets. Let's try to build something here before we get out of here with the kind of idea that we want to double stack Lamar Jackson, but we still want to take some of that value from the Saints. We don't want to get too crazy to where we just don't play good play. So let's start with let's do actually instead of Duvernay. So I did mention Duvernay and Likely earlier, but we want to capitalize on all that value for New Orleans. So we want to save some money while being unique with this double stack. Let's actually go Jackson, Isaiah Likely, and Oliver. since I just talked him up so much and see what we've got left. Now with 8,133 per player, whatever, couple options. You could play Alvin Kamara, you could play Andy Dalton with this lineup. So it really just kind of depends where you think the offense is going to go. I'm going to go ahead and go Andy Dalton since I know that I want to play a couple low-priced options. So I probably want to go Chris Olave with Andy Dalton if I could ever find him at 8,600. And that still leaves you 5,600. And here's your options at 5,600 that I would do with this lineup. I would go Callaway, Johnson, or Tre'Quan Smith, like I talked about earlier, and leave a good bit of salary because remember, there's so many cheap options on this slate because there's so many injuries. So don't feel bad about leaving $3,000, $4,000 on the table. Actually, I would prefer to leave about that amount on the table because, like I said, you're playing with such cheap options that are in elevated roles in this slate. So for the sake of this lineup, I like Juwan Johnson. So I'm going to leave 1,200 on the table. I'm going Lamar Jackson at captain, Isaiah Likely, Josh Oliver, Andy Dalton, Chris Olave, and Juwan Johnson. So that's how I would approach double stacking Lamar Jackson, and that's how I would approach this slate. Thank you all so much for coming out. This has been Showdown Coverage brought to you by SharpFootballAnalysis.com. I'm your host, Adam Wilde, and I will catch y'all next week.